There's a question almost nobody asks, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Which car changed Italy more than any other? If Ferrari came to mind just now, the red cars, the racing trophies, the glamour of Maranello, I understand. That's the postcard version of Italy's automotive story. Beautiful, exciting, and almost completely beside the point. Because the car that truly changed Italy, that moved its people, rebuilt its middle class, and rewired the way ordinary families lived, wasn't born in a racing factory. It was built in Turin, in a vast plant beside the River Po, by engineers who were thinking not about winning races, but about solving a very human problem. It weighed less than 600 kilograms. It had a 633cc engine mounted in the rear, and it cost 590,000 lire. It was called the Fiat 600, the Seicento. And if you were alive in the 1950s or 60s, whether in Italy, Spain, Yugoslavia, or Argentina, this car touched your world in some way, because this wasn't just a product. This was a social transformation on four wheels. To understand what the 600 actually did, you need to understand what Italy looked like before it arrived. Without that context, this is just a small old car. With it, it becomes something closer to a miracle. Cast your mind back to 1945. The war had just ended. Italy was in ruins, not metaphorically, literally. Factories bombed, infrastructure shattered. Cities still scarred by years of conflict. The average Italian family had nothing, no savings, no security, certainly nothing on four wheels. What they had, if they were lucky, was a bicycle, or a Vespa, or a Lambretta scooter, 2 wheels, not 4. That was the realistic ceiling of ambition for most working-class Italians in the late 1940s, not because they lacked drive or intelligence, because the economy simply offered nothing more. And yet, within a single decade, Italy became the country with the second highest rate of car ownership in all of Europe, second only to West Germany. How does a nation go from rubble and scooters to millions of privately owned cars in 10 years? That is the story we're telling today. And it starts with one man's clear-eyed vision and another man's engineering genius. The man with the vision was Vittorio Valletta. He ran Fiat for nearly 4 decades, from 1928 until his death in 1966, the genuine architect of what Fiat became in the post-war era. And Valletta had an idea that sounds almost radical even today. He believed Fiat should build a car affordable enough that the very worker who built it could buy it. Not a car for the doctor, not for the lawyer, a car for the man on the assembly line, a car for the family in the small Turin apartment who had never once sat behind a steering wheel. This wasn't charity, it was strategy, and Valletta understood it completely. If you flood the market with affordable cars, you don't just sell cars, you build an entire economy around those cars. Roads, fuel, mechanics, insurance, tourism, restaurants at the motorway junction, hotels at the coast. The car becomes an engine, no pun intended, for everything else. So, in 1951, Valletta gave the brief to his chief engineer: build something that seats 4 adults, fits in the narrow streets of Italian towns, costs as little as humanly possible, can be manufactured at serious scale. The man who received that brief was Dante Giacosa. Born in Rome in 1905, trained at the Polytechnic University of Turin, one of Europe's finest technical institutions, he joined Fiat at 22. He'd already designed the pre-war Topolino, Italy's original people's car. But by the early 1950s, Italy needed something new, something modern, something that could carry a full family. Giacosa's first attempt was bold, perhaps too bold. He designed a front-wheel drive car with a front-mounted engine. Had it worked, it would have been the first mass-produced front-wheel drive car in the world. He was pointing directly at the future of automotive design in 1951. But the technology wasn't ready. The constant velocity joints needed for front-wheel drive were too complex, too unreliable for mass production. He was given 4 months to start again. 4 months. And what he came back with defined Italian motoring for the next 15 years. Rear engine, rear-wheel drive, Water-cooled 4-cylinder, 23 horsepower. On paper, modest. In 1955, a revelation. By placing the engine at the rear, Giacosa freed the entire front of the car for passengers and luggage. The cabin felt genuinely spacious in a car barely over 10 feet long. And he solved the handling problem that plagued other rear-engine designs. The Volkswagen Beetle had it. The Chevrolet Corvair had it badly enough to trigger a safety scandal in America. Even the early Porsche 911 wrestled with it. Giacosa used semi-trailing arm rear suspension rather than the crude swing axle his rivals relied on. 4 adults, a mountain curve, and the 600 did exactly what you asked. Weight under 600 kilograms. Top speed approaching 100 kilometers per hour. Fuel consumption, around 5.5 liters per 100 kilometers. Then there was the price, 590,000 lire. And Valletta pushed hard for installment plans, cambiali, promissory notes, so ordinary families could sign papers and drive away that same afternoon. Millions did. The Mirafiori plant scaled to 1,000 cars per day. The millionth rolled off the line in February 1961, less than 6 years after launch. Italy had never produced anything like this before. Here is the part that never makes it into the car magazines. The part that gets completely lost when people write about the Fiat 600 as a vehicle, rather than as a social force. Mirafiori needed workers, tens of thousands of them. Turin and the surrounding region couldn't supply enough on its own. So Fiat recruited from the south, from Calabria, from Sicily, from Campania, from the poorest regions of a country that still bore a profound divide between its industrialized north and its agricultural south. Millions of southern Italians packed everything they owned and moved north, to Turin, to Milan, to the cities where the factories were. They came because the wages were real. Because for the first time in generations, there was a path upward, and it ran through a car factory. This migration transformed Italy in ways that go far beyond the automotive story. Cities swelled. New neighborhoods appeared almost overnight. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, everything expanded to absorb this movement of people. Italy urbanized faster in the 1950s and 60s than almost any other European country. And those workers, the ones who had left everything behind to weld panels and tighten bolts at Mirafiori, many of them eventually bought the very car they were building. That was Valletta's plan. It was not accidental, it was architecture. Now pay close attention to this next part. Before the Fiat 600, an Italian family's world was defined by how far they could walk, or cycle, or travel on a Vespa. The Sunday afternoon was local. The holiday, if it happened at all, was nearby. The coast, the mountains, these were places other people went. The 600 changed that. It physically expanded the radius of ordinary Italian life. The tradition of the Sunday drive, what Italians called the gita fuori porta, the trip out beyond the city gates, was essentially invented by this car. Families who had never seen the sea could now reach it in an afternoon. Mountain villages, isolated for generations, suddenly had visitors arriving on a Sunday. The entire Italian tourism industry began reshaping itself around the fact that ordinary families could now move. Italian television was helping too. RAI had only begun broadcasting in 1954. There was a legal ban on car advertising on television at the time, so Fiat's production company made short documentary-style films, not quite advertisements. Not quite journalism showing the 600 in daily life, families at the seaside, children in the back seat, the open road ahead. It worked. By the early 1960s, Italy had undergone what economists would call il miracolo economico, the Italian economic miracle. GDP had doubled in a decade. Living standards had risen dramatically, and at the center of it, as both symbol and engine, was the Fiat 600. Before we go further, if this is landing for you, subscribe to this channel right now. We tell stories like this regularly, the real history behind machines that shaped the world. Hit like. Leave a comment telling me what this era means to you, or what car takes you back to this period, and share this with a friend who loves history. Let's keep going. In January 1956, 10 months after the 600 launched, Giacosa unveiled something at the Brussels Motor Show, that looked like nothing else on the road. It was called the Fiat 600 Multipla. Take the 600's mechanical's engine, gearbox, suspension, and build an entirely different body around them. Push the driver's cab forward, directly over the front axle. Eliminate the bonnet. You now have a completely vertical front face, like a miniature bus, with 3 rows of seats stretching back from the windscreen. The result: 6 adults, seated in a vehicle just 3 meters and 50 centimeters long, 50 centimeters longer than a Mini Cooper. 6 people, 50 centimeters. Nobody had done this before at production scale. The Fiat 600 Multipla is, by most serious historical accounts, the world's first mass-produced, multi-purpose vehicle. The forerunner of every minivan, every MPV, every flexible family carrier since, the Renault Espace of 1984, gets the credit in most automotive histories. But the Multipla arrived nearly 3 decades earlier with fold-flat seats, a flexible loading floor, and a taxi variant that served Italian cities through the 1970s. Around 243,000 were built before Italian safety regulations ended production in 1966. But the concept it embedded that a family vehicle should reconfigure for people, for cargo, for a weekend away lives in every 7-seat crossover, sold today. And the 600's influence extended far beyond Italy's borders. In Spain, the Seat 600 entered production in 1957 and ran until 1973, producing nearly 800,000 units. It became the defining symbol of Spain's own economic recovery. In Yugoslavia, the Zastava 750, known with genuine affection as the Feature, ran until 1985. 30 years after the original Geneva launch, the same basic design was still rolling off a Yugoslav production line. In Argentina, they called it the Fetito. In Chile, in Colombia. This was a world car before the concept had a name. And the 600 seeded something even more famous. In 1957, Giacosa took the 600's rear-engine architecture, scaled it slightly downward, gave it an air-cooled twin-cylinder engine, and rounder bodywork. The result was the Fiat Nuova 500, the Cinquecento, one of the most reproduced design icons in European automotive history, still referenced in design studios around the world today. The 500 is the famous one, the one on the posters, the one in the museum collections, the one people photograph in Italian hill towns. But the 600 came first. The 600 proved the concept. The 600 was the blueprint. Without the 600, there is no Nuova 500. That is the part that gets quietly lost every time someone puts the Cinquecento on a pedestal. And now we reach the comparison that gives this video its title, the one that might make some people uncomfortable. Good. It should. Ferrari in the 1950s was extraordinary. Nobody is arguing otherwise. Enzo Ferrari was building some of the most beautiful and capable racing machines in the history of the sport. His cars were winning at Le Mans, winning at the Mille Miglia, winning world championships. The prancing horse on the yellow shield was becoming a global symbol of Italian craft and passion. All of that is real, all of that matters. But here is the question worth sitting with, the one that changes the frame entirely. When a Ferrari crossed the finish line at Le Mans in 1953, who actually benefited? The engineers who built it, Enzo Ferrari himself, the wealthy clients who bought road cars carrying the reflected glory of that racing heritage, the brand, the legend. And Italy? Italy got prestige. Italy got a reputation. Italy got to feel proud when reporters wrote about Italian engineering genius. Pride is real. Reputation matters. But pride doesn't buy groceries. Prestige doesn't get a factory worker's family to the beach on a Sunday afternoon. A Le Mans trophy doesn't change where a man can afford to live, or whether his children grow up with choices their parents never had. The Fiat 600 did all of those things, quietly, without glamour, without a single lap record or championship banner. Consider the numbers plainly. Nearly 2,700,000 Fiat 600s were built at Mirafiori between 1955 and 1969. Including worldwide license production, The total approaches 5 million cars, 5 million families experiencing private transport, and everything that comes with it for the first time in their lives. Ferrari's entire output across the same period was measured in hundreds per year, as it should be. Ferrari was never trying to change Italy. Ferrari was trying to win races and sell expensive dreams. The Fiat 600 wasn't selling a dream, it was delivering a reality. And the distance between those two things, between the dream and the reality, is precisely the distance that matters when we talk about what actually changes a society. Think about it this way. If you remove Ferrari from Italian history, Italy loses prestige, it loses celebrated moments in motorsport, it loses a luxury brand that became one of the most recognized on earth. But the rhythm of everyday Italian life, the social mobility, the geography of how people moved, the structure of the economy, stays largely the same. Now remove the Fiat 600, remove the mass motorization it triggered, remove the southern migration it enabled, remove the tourism it created, remove the middle class it helped build. Italy in the 1960s looks completely different, smaller, more static, more divided, more stuck. The car that changed Italy most was never the fastest one. It was the one that cost 590,000 lire and could be paid off in monthly installments by the man who built it. There is a pattern here that goes well beyond cars. The tools that genuinely change the world are almost never the glamorous ones. They're rarely the ones that get the poster, the film, the mythology, the museum wing. They're the ones that do the quiet, unglamorous, essential work of closing the gap between where people are and where they could be. The Ford Model T wasn't the most beautiful car ever made. The Volkswagen Beetle wasn't born from racing ambition. The Austin 7 wasn't a luxury machine. They were practical, affordable, within reach. And they each moved entire societies forward in ways that the glamorous machines of their era simply couldn't. The Fiat 600 belongs in that company, completely and without apology. What it achieved in Italy between 1955 and the late 1960s was a restructuring of daily life itself. The Sunday drive, the coastal holiday, the factory worker buying the car he built, the southern Italian family loading a multipla and starting again somewhere new, the Fiat 600 owner in Barcelona feeling, perhaps for the first time in his life, that the open road was actually his. These are not footnotes. These are the substance of history, the history that actually happened, in kitchens and driveways, and on motorways, leading to the sea. Here is the uncomfortable truth worth carrying with you after this video ends. We tend to celebrate the thing that looks like victory, the trophy, the speed record, the headline. But the real story is usually quieter, smaller, closer to the ground. The real story is almost always about who got access to something they didn't have before and what they did with it. The Fiat 600 gave millions of people access to movement, to freedom, to a version of ordinary life their parents could never have imagined possible. And those people built the Italian economic miracle. They built the Spain that emerged from isolation. They built modern Turin. They built a different future, one small rear-engined car at a time. A 633cc engine, 23 horsepower, 590,000 lire. Enough to change a continent. If this video made you think, and I believe it did, here is what I'm asking. Subscribe to this channel right now. We tell stories like this one regularly, the hidden history behind machines that shaped the world, the untold chapters that never make the front page. Hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps more people find this kind of content. Leave a comment below. Tell me, do you remember the Fiat 600, the Fiat 600, the feature? Did someone in your family own one? What does this era mean to you? Those stories belong in this conversation. And if you've got a friend who loves history, cars, and the way the world actually works, share this with them. Today, not tomorrow. The Fiat 600 deserved better than a footnote in history. Now it has something better. Thank you for watching.